Welcome to part 2 of our video on common mistakes in English, misused forms, brought to you by Lingua MH. We are still talking about common mistakes using the wrong prepositions with high-frequency verbs or nouns. When using the word covered, the correct preposition is with or in, not by. For example, say, the mountains are covered with snow, or in snow. For the verb cure, the correct preposition is of, not from. You should say, the man was cured of his illness. Note that the noun cure takes for. When using the verb depend, use on or upon, not from. Say, it depends on or upon her. Remember, rely also uses on or upon. The correct preposition for deprive is of, not from. For instance, say, Nelson Mandela was deprived of his freedom. For the verb die, when referring to an illness, use only the preposition of, not from. Say, many people have died of malaria. Note that die from is used for wounds or overwork, and you also say die by for violence. When using different, the correct preposition is from, not than. Say, my book is different from yours. For disappointed, use with or in for people. Use by, about, or at for things. For example, Jane was disappointed with or in her son, and Philippa was disappointed by, about, or at the low mark. The verb divide takes the preposition into when referring to parts, not in. Say, I divided the cake into 4 parts. However, you can say divide in half or in 2. When using doubt as a noun, the correct prepositions are of or about, not for. Say, I have no doubt of or about his ability. When describing someone being dressed, use the preposition in, not with. For example, the woman was dressed in black. For exception, use the preposition to, not of. Say, this is an exception to the rule. Note that the phrase with the exception of is correct. The verb exchange takes the preposition for, not by. Say, he exchanged matchboxes for stamps. When using the verb fail, the correct preposition is in, not from. Say, Stephen failed in maths last year. The adjective full takes the preposition of, not with. Say, the jar was full of oil. However, the verb fill takes with. The idiom get rid uses the preposition of, not from. Say, I'll be glad to get rid of him. The adjective glad takes the preposition about, not from or with. Say, Francis was glad about receiving your letter. When referring to ability, good takes the preposition at, not in. Say, my sister's good at maths. Note that weak takes in. The verb guard takes the preposition against, not from. Say, you must guard against bad habits. Don't say guilty for. You should say guilty of. For example, he was found guilty of murder. Don't say independent from. Say independent of. For example, Claire is independent of her parents. Don't say indifferent for. Say indifferent to. For example, they're indifferent to politics. For the verb insist, say insist on. For example, he always insisted on his opinion. For the word interested, say interested in. For example, she's not interested in her work.
For the word jealous, always say of. For example, he's very jealous of his brother.
Don't say leave to. Instead, say leave for. For example, they leaving for England soon.
If you want to say that someone depends on another person financially, you can say live on. For example, he lives on his brother's money. For the verb look, always say look at. For example, look at this beautiful picture. For the word married, always say to. For example, Angela was married to a rich man. When using the word opposite, always say opposite to. Their house is opposite to ours. When using the verb pass, always say pass by. For example, will you pass by the post office? For the verb play, when talking about a team, always say for. He plays regularly for that team. Always say pleased with. For example, the teacher is pleased with me. When using the word popular, always say with. John's popular with his friends. When using the verb prefer, always say to. For example, I prefer a blue pen to a red one. Always say preside at. For example, who presided at the last meeting, or who presided over the last meeting. Always say proud of. He's very proud of his promotion. When using the verb rejoice, always say at or in. We rejoiced at or in her success. Always say related to. For example, are you related to Simon? When using the verb repent, always say of. He repented of his crime.
When using the word satisfied, the rule is to use satisfied with, not from. For example, say, are you satisfied with your marks? When describing something as similar, use the preposition to and not with. Correctly say, your house is similar to mine.
For the verb sit, you can say sit at, on, or in. If you're talking about a desk, say at. The bank manager was sitting at his desk. For a chair, say on, and for an armchair, say in.
When talking about how you spend time, money, or effort, the correct preposition is on, not for. For instance, say, I spend time on my computer. For the verb succeed, the rule is to use succeed in, not at. So you should say, I hope he'll succeed in his work. The word superior is followed by to, not than. This is superior to that. This rule also applies to inferior, junior, and senior, all of which are followed by to. When expressing certainty, use sure of, not for. The correct phrasing is, I'm quite sure of her honesty. Finally, when using the word surprised, the correct prepositions are at or by, not for. An example is, Harold was surprised at or by the loud bang.